Good day, everyone, and a warm welcome to the third session of the LGBTQ plus Elder Services Housing Symposium titled Thriving in Community, Home Ownership as Aging Care. We are delighted to have both returning attendees and newcomers with us today as we delve into an important discussion. I'm Ephraim Getahun, your host and moderator for this session. My pronouns are they and he, and I serve as the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Training at the Open House LGBTQ Senior Center, coming to you live from San Francisco. It's an absolute honor to guide you through this informative event. To provide a bit of context, Open House was founded in 1998, and it is deeply committed to amplifying the voices and experiences of LGBTQ plus older adults, fostering connections, offering support. We provide housing, direct services, community programs tailored to the unique challenges of aging for LGBTQ plus seniors in the San Francisco Bay Area. At Open House, our dedication extends to embracing the diverse tapestry of LGBTQ plus identities and experiences, recognizing the intersections of race, ethnicity, class and culture, HIV status, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, spirituality, and ability. Within our community, each individual is a cherished member. Before we dive into today's enlightening discussion, I'd like to acknowledge the land I'm speaking to you from, which is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, originally known as Yelamu. It's crucial that we pay homage to this land and its indigenous heritage in the spirit of unity and solidarity with indigenous communities worldwide. Let's remember our shared responsibility to address historical injustices. I encourage you to genuinely reflect on your connection to the land you inhabit and consider participating in local voluntary land taxes as a step towards restitution. Let's briefly cover some logistical details. Thanks to InterpreNet, we have live English and Spanish captioning, and thanks to Interpret That, which is providing live ASL interpretation. Should you encounter any technical issues or have any questions, please don't hesitate to use the chat feature to reach out to our team. Your experience here is of utmost importance to us. As we journey through this series, our goal remains steadfast to offer invaluable insights and discussions on LGBTQ plus aging in housing. Whether you're a familiar face or a first-time participant, we trust that you'll find today's session engaging and informative. In our discussion today, we'll build upon the insights from previous sessions by bringing together community advocates, housing and aging experts, and service providers for a session entitled Thriving in Community, Home Ownership as Aging Care. Together, we'll explore the promise, challenges, and opportunities of individual and communal home ownership models. These models not only can preserve a sense of place for seniors, but also cultivate a robust social fabric to combat isolation and health decline. The East Bay Permanent Real Estate Collective, affectionately known as EB-PERC, will share their model and insights, emphasizing how collective home ownership and community empowerment offer community members a chance to live with both economic and social stability. I want to take a moment to note that while the model we're discussing today may not be specifically tailored to directly support LGBTQ plus elders, its potential is undeniably seductive. It holds the promise of addressing critical needs within our community. We aim to introduce this model to developers and community leaders, centering the work that's happening with our esteemed speaker, encouraging them to consider adapting it to better meet the unique needs of LGBTQ plus seniors. The East Bay Permanent Real Estate Collective will be sharing their experiences and insights, shedding light on how collective home ownership and community empowerment can offer elders a chance to age in place with both economic and social stability. Thank you for being a part of this vital conversation, and let's work together to make this session meaningful for everyone. So, without further ado, it is with great pleasure that I introduce our esteemed speaker for today's session, Noni Session. Noni is a co-founder and executive director of East Bay Permanent Real Estate Collective, a third-generation West Oaklander, cultural anthropologist, and grassroots organizer. Noni's roots in Oakland run deep, and multifaceted background in academia and grassroots activism brings a genuinely unique perspective to economic development. As an Oakland native, the journey has taken Noni on a diverse path from academic pursuits to international humanitarian work. Noni cut academic teeth on the challenges of equitable international economic development, delving into strategies to uplift communities worldwide as a Fulbright Hays Fellow. Noni's dedication to understanding and addressing resource disparities led Noni to co-found several small-scale collective civic action networks. In 2016, Noni ran for city council, where Noni captured more than 43% of the District 3 vote. That is on period. This experience illuminated a clear path for Noni, ameliorating resource disparities in Noni's beloved West Oakland community through the creation of cooperative networks and the mobilization of opportunities for collective economic action. It is with this vision that Noni co-founded EBPREC, firmly believing that a cooperative economy is the clearest pathway to economic justice and a solution to the rapid displacement affecting Noni's community. Noni's commitment to equitable economic development and Noni's tireless efforts to create a more just and inclusive society are truly inspiring. We are honored to have Noni here today to share insight and experiences with us, so please join me in extending a warm virtual welcome to Noni's session. Noni, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Ephraim. I'm going to start with a little video, and then we'll return to our programming.
Okay, so I'm gonna do it. Ready? EBPREC, Guanu!
Hello, I am Noni Session. I'm a third generation West Oaklander and one of the founding staff members and executive director of the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. Today, we are at Liberation Park for the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative third annual member meeting. This year, it's an open member meeting and a land liberation celebration, celebrating our historic acquisition of the Esther's Orbit Room along the 7th Street corridor in West Oakland. The East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, as a Black and people of color-led, multi-stakeholder co-op, knows that there is no shortage of vision in our community. What there is a shortage of is resources, and in fact, non-extractive resources. So we galvanize low interest and non-extractive investment. We help build out land and housing real estate projects. We tap Black and brown leaders who want to support the search, the fundraising, the acquisition, and the long-term asset management of those land and housing acquisitions, and we give it to them because we know that Oaklanders know what Oaklanders need.
And then with Esther's Orbit Room, I'm just so excited to get the keys and to be able to vision with folks in the space, and seeing the legacy Oaklanders who have memories of Esther and of being in that space, being able to come and remake it into their own space, that we can help make that vision a reality. That's really what we're doing here. So the minimum investment is $1,000 share, but we actually let people pay it off with a payment plan. So I think our minimum invested to date is like $100 per person. Anyone in California and now in 12 other states can buy a share in EBPREC or more shares at $1,000, and those shares go into our general fund, which we invest in various projects like Esther's Orbit Room, which is a mix of commercial and residential property. And those investments really make it possible for us to keep the properties affordable and community owned. So it allows folks to take their money out of Wall Street or out of the bank and invest it in community.
We are reviving the historic asset Esther's Orbit Room under the name the Esther's Orbit Room Cultural Revival Project. We're bringing to market, because of the impact dollars that you yourself have invested in this vision, we're bringing to market 4 commercial footprints at 50% of market rate: a cafe, a bar, a performance venue, a fine arts gallery, a movement arts gallery, and we're trying to figure out how to create a resource for the kids too. because we're using esters as the jump off point to reground a community into the West Oakland corridor. And esters is the first step in the acquisitions in the flats of West Oakland. And it is the pilot project of our $50 million land and housing acquisition fund. Invest today.
Well, that was a small piece of our work, just to give you all a sense of the vibration that we carry in the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. So I'm really grateful that you all have us here today, and the revival of many collective communal movements we all recognize have been supported by the brave movements of our queer and LGBTQ community members. So we've all built this road together. So this is our current staff collective for the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. We tend to gather in space together to reinforce the relationships that are often strained by the stress of this kind of bureaucratic, finance, and justice building work. So we do spend time in space so as to keep the human element in our work. So our mission is to facilitate Black and people of color and allied communities to cooperatively organize, finance, purchase, occupy, and steward properties long-term. We specifically take these properties off of the speculative market in order to create community-controlled assets and empowering our communities and our community leaders to be the trailblazers in a true just transition from extractive and negating economic and social practices into practices that are ecologically, emotionally, spiritually, and culturally regenerative. We know that that's a mouthful, and yet if you do not fold in the transformative and the reparative design into conventional fields like real estate and like finance, you will necessarily have the same outcome that has positioned us all to be in such a vulnerable state as we find today. So in order to do our technical work, we have 3 mission pillars that guide all of our choices. Our first mission pillar, and the most pertinent, is land without landlords. Removing land from the speculative market does more than just stabilize the cost of land and housing. It also creates pathways for communities to organize, raise capital, build a cultural framework in order to hold the land long-term in perpetuity. When you remove land from the space of being a commodity into a cultural resource, it changes how you use it. It changes your outcomes. Our second mission pillar, restorative economics, recognizes that we've all been dispossessed of more than the concrete asset, land and housing. We've been dispossessed of the critical resources that allow us not only to acquire land and housing, but to keep it. Relationships, networks, capital, skill sets. So restorative economics recognizes that there's a transfer of more than just resources as we reclaim land and housing, that it is a skills transfer and a transformation of an unjust finance and housing system that bars communities from building wealth for themselves among themselves. So the goal is to redistribute the spread of resources necessary for these outcomes. Our third mission pillar, Heal People Power, understands that as Americans, we are born and bred on violence and hierarchy. And in order to build durable grassroots organizations, we have to rethink how we do power, how we share power, and how we claim power for ourselves. So, part of our work internally in our staff collective and in the co ops we help launch, and in the community groups we advise, is to cultivate democratic and nonviolent governance that short circuits these learned colonial power practices and rebuilds our capacity to heal ourselves and one another. That is the pivotal and radical need for grassroots underrepresented people, is to learn a new way to do power. None of our visions will ever survive under the regime of power hoarding, warmongering, ego feeding, and general emotional, psychological, and material greed. Those have to be uprooted for our future. So, the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is understood as a multi-stakeholder cooperative. And I'll talk a little bit more about our member categories shortly. But often people don't grasp the anatomy of EBPREC and from where we've pulled our techniques. So we've been inspired from across the fields. In the protest and movement building field, we really look to continue to build a critical mass of community members to hold the vision, be the guiding mechanism, and the accountability mechanism for the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. And we organize both individuals, communities, and high net worth folks around just-based outcomes in real estate and finance. We're also inspired by the housing co-op model. And in this case, our model is closest to the limited equity housing co-op, yet our model accounts for the condition that most of us don't have advanced capital to put down and acquire land and housing. So though our resident owners come in without a buy-in, they are also able to accrue many of the benefits of home ownership, including an equity account, autonomy and control over the acquisition, as well as the skill sets that really build community ownership among our members. We also model ourselves off of investment funds. So, we talk about individual attainment being a valent practice in American society. And actually, it's individualism is a practice of the poor and the underrepresented. Because if you look at every hedge fund, every investment account, those are collectives of people combining economic action to create an outcome. So East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is Oakland's first land and housing investment fund, where we can all access the capital and create a future that we have envisioned and generated together. We're inspired by and guided by the land trust movement. As I mentioned, we remove land permanently from the speculative market and we protect it in perpetuity through covenants in our bylaws, as well as covenants we make with our resident owners. And finally, we're inspired by the long tradition of the worker cooperative. Our organization is people of color led, democratically governed, and the same vision that we are attempting to create out in the world, in the co-ops and the housing and land situations we launch, we hold our internal staff operations to the same standards of power sharing, transparency, and radical nonviolence. So now we're going to take a step back and talk about what a cooperative is. So people have lots of ideas of what a cooperative can mean. As you see here, our little cooperative elephant. What is it? A tax category, a type of corporation? Does it adhere to a special set of principles? Is it always democratic? Sometimes people think cooperatives are very soft kind of nuts and berries, as one might put it, configurations. They can be. Cooperatives really hold a collective vision under the legal umbrella of a corporate category. So the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is a California cooperative corporation. And there are some legal benefits and some legal obligations being a California cooperative corporation, one of which is democratic and transparent governance. But a benefit is that instead of cloistering power, as we see in the nonprofit and the government model, instead of cloistering power among typically all white boards, white executive directors, it shares power across the membership of the organization. It offers transparency at all levels of membership, and it distributes the benefits, the profits, which we call surplus, to all of the invested members across the organization. So this is a way to share economy and power and subvert the very static structures that we find in the nonprofit and the government structure right now, particularly in service to our urban and underserved communities. So there's lots of different types of cooperatives who can do lots of different things. There are consumer co-ops where consumers buy a product together and create a discount by buying large scale. There's producer co-ops where groups of people or organizations pool their labor to create a product from a raw material, a farm, wool, silks, etc. There are worker co-ops, and these things can cross categories. Worker co-ops are owned and self-managed by its workers. If I can return for a second to our mission pillar, Land Without Landlords, the underlying meaning of that is really about us owning our own means of labor, our own identities and our own futures, instead of relegating them to the owner class, which one might call bosses or landlords. Returning to this, there's the investment co-op. A financial cooperative is a way to structure a financial institution so it's owned and operated by its members. A multi-stakeholder co-ops. Those are co-ops that are owned and controlled by more than one type of membership. That's where you find EBPREC. There are some co-ops out there that are emblematic of these different kinds of cooperatives. There is REI, where folks widely source camping gear and you receive a rebate or a surplus at the end of the year for what you've bought, along with some of your fellow consumers. There are producer co-ops. That's a First Nations cooperative, and I'm pretty sure Tonka produces jerky and other food products from the animal life that they have on their land. There's the worker co-op, ours Mindy Bakery, which is a proper legal California cooperative. And then there are organizations like the Sustainable Economies Law Center, who actually is our parent organization who helped incubate the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. They're called a worker-controlled nonprofit, which means they do fall into the range of nonprofit work, but there is not a boss that leads or overdetermines their work. These are equal members of the Sustainable Economies Law Center that run their projects together and make decisions together. There are investment co-ops. One well-known one is Boston Ujima Project that invests in community-led projects through raising investment capital from the community and foundations. Boston Ujima is one of our major inspirations. And then there are cooperatives like EBPREC, a multi-stakeholder cooperative that combines several different member categories to create a specific outcome. So when you compare the ownership models, um, which is a critical element of how the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative brings our member owners together to create our outcomes, you can see the distinction. Under a capitalist approach, the legal structure is private ownership. Uh, they're often it's not affordable or at best rent controlled, meaning that um, tenants are dependent on the goodwill of their owner class or their local government to protect their ability to stay in place. Income level can be wide under a capitalist approach to housing and land ownership. The ratio of people gets smaller as the income is lower. The organizational governance is by one individual, one owner. Property governance is by one individual and one owner. And loans come from the classic extractive capitalist system with very high interest rates, which are often passed on to the person who lives and works in the housing or land situation. And it creates the effect of wealth consolidation, wealth and surplus that accrues to one person, while all the other people in the supply chain are extracted from in order to accrue that wealth. When you look at the community land trust model, which guides us and inspires us, they fall into the 501c3 nonprofit range. They are perpetual. They do support low income. They do often have a community board that has some control over larger, higher level decisions. Um, Property governance still cedes to the individual model. Sometimes there are cooperatives that are able to live and work in a community land trust housing. Their capital comes from loans, grants, and subsidies. Nonprofits are not able to bring in investment. There are some laws that are changing, but they're very specific to the state. And there is often no or very limited equity for residents. I think those things are also changing now at this point. In response to models like EB-Prex that demonstrate that there are other ways to share value and share surplus. So if you look at the PREC model, the permanent real estate cooperative model, which means that we are permanently holding, co-owning, and co-stewarding land. That's the part of PREC. There's now a Massachusetts PREC. I think there's a Washington PREC. And we've helped several projects launch in other states that have pulled parts of our model in whole or in part. The PREC is a California cooperative corporation, as I mentioned. It also holds land perpetually and restricts itself from resale of the land or extractive use of the land for the duration of its ownership. The PREC is especially fit to supporting low and mixed income individuals, although across the income board, this is a very transformative model. Membership is undertaken by all of the members, and governance is undertaken by the residents of each individual acquisition. Our funding comes from selling shares or investment in the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, low interest and impact loans, grants, and subsidies. The grants are especially important to each of our acquisitions as it keeps down the overall price of the cost of the land or housing. As one of the challenges of housing affordability is the development of the project, the cost of the dollars are always passed on to the resident. And that is where unaffordability really comes in. Individual extraction, expensive and extractive capital, and the cost of administration. The East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative explicitly, according to its value system, seeks to displace those excess costs so that folks can stay permanently in a state of affordability so that they can use their time and energy to make other interventions on their life, on their culture, and on their community. So there are challenges and benefits of cooperation. The challenges are it takes lots of time and energy. It takes a lot of learning and unlearning. It takes a lot of digging deep into the self to work through interpersonal conflict. This is a very human intensive endeavor to build and cooperate. It also demands that we're able to share responsibility non-violently, consistently, and in an authentic manner. Once you find yourself in a cooperation situation with folks who do not trust one another, who are challenged with personal transformation, that is when you see the vestiges of our power practices from our mainstream and conventional work. The benefits of staying vigilant and attentive to these ways that we need internal and communal transformation to build strong organizations is that you build community there. You tap into your own personal growth in these moments. You are able to preserve affordability for yourself and for your community. You build something together as opposed to standing back and watching profit-seeking developers and city municipalities who are following other priorities and agendas determine the future of your community. You have a say, your voice is heard, and you are healed by way of hearing and offering a say to others around you with whom you are collaborating. So, our story as East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is actually a pretty special one. We're a baby birthed by two streams of visionary thought. There's the Sustainable Economies Law Center, whose mission is to support regenerative and transformative collective economic and cooperative activity. At the time, around 2014, the Sustainable Economies Law Center was imagining as the population in Oakland and the Bay Area was changing and booming, and you saw prices skyrocketing. What you saw in parallel with that was a lot of collective housing and living situations popping up. There were circus performers and artists and metal workers and programmers. What you weren't seeing as those transformations took place in Oakland is Black and Brown people being housed in these situations. Our displacement level accelerated as Oakland boomed, as the population changed. So Silk was wondering what could they put in place in advance to prepare for some future organization that would hold themselves as the vehicle, the financial and technical vehicle for Black and Brown folks to own property together in a market like the Oakland and the East Bay. So one thing they started working on, first of all, there's a great paper that you can get from the Sustainable Economies Law Center website, Homeownership is Dead. It's about now an 8-year-old white paper, but it gives a clear vision of what are the irreconcilable problems in our real estate and finance market and where we can take our interventions to really create something transformative. The next thing that the Sustainable Economies Law Center did was work to change a critical California securities law where at the time, one was only able to invest up to $350 in any cooperative enterprise. And they raised the cap to $1,000 for any non-accredited investor. And that means an individual with a net worth of $1 million or less could invest their money, could ask their cousin, their neighbor, their aunt, their father to contribute $1,000 at 1.5% return, about what you would get from your Wells Fargo account. Let the organization, in this case, what it became was EBPREC, hold the investment over 5 years. And you pull together 200 or 400 people who have $1,000 each, and you have the down payment for your first $1.5 million property. And this is money completely controlled by the individuals who launched the investment opportunity and who want to co-govern the land and housing together. And it brings the cost of the project down by about 40 or 50% because of the non-compounded interest rate. You could contribute that to Wells Fargo, or you could contribute that to a community project. Around the same time, People of Color Housing Network, affectionately called POTION, was also seeing the same phenomena, and we're looking for legal advice for how to circumvent these barriers, these growing barriers to housing, and the lack of access to any capital to remediate the condition. POTION went to one of Sustainable Economies Law Center's free legal clinics and came to understand that they were on the same page together, and began to write bylaws for a future imaginary organization that would be completely committed to justice, balance, democratic governance, and radical permanence in our communities through the acquisition of land and housing. And in order to start finding who those people might be, POTION and SELC held monthly advisory councils where it was an open door that people could come in and design all of the elements of this future organization together. And eventually, what happened is that several of the volunteers turned out to be the founding staff collective. And that would be myself. Here we go. We'll go back very quickly. Myself, Noni Session, Ojan Mobed Shahi, our finance director, Shira Shaham, our operations director, and two of our previous co-founders, Gregory Jackson and Marissa Ashkar. So once we congealed into a vision, we had to start to build out our strategy. Our first strategy was to do what we called a door knocking campaign. But it wasn't the typical door knocking campaign where you went to your neighbors' doors and organized them around some explicit need for their neighborhood or their municipality. We went on a capital door knocking campaign. We were curious about the nature of the financial and real estate landscape when a new vision such as ours entered into the space. So we went to large organizations like CDFIs, community financial development institutions, local support corporations like Bay Area LISC, cooperative banks like Bank of the Bay, Self-Help Credit Union, and really announced to the fields what we felt we could do through collaborative and radical crowd financing. Most folks thought, what a cute idea, and often said, let's keep talking. And in the nonprofit world and in the capital world, that often means no. And so our proof of concept, we knew, was very much based in creating a critical mass with our people, with our everyday people, our aunts, our cousins, our neighbors. And for Cooperative 789, as we looked to vet the right project, at this point, we've purchased 5 projects, and we will probably have 8 by the beginning of 2024, if that is the year we are going into. But at the time, after purchasing 5 projects, we have vetted about 60 total. So as we launched, we were going from potential promising project to potential promising project, but really hadn't found the one that grounded both our mission, that fell within a range of capital that we could generate, and also held the promise that we could build more structures for more people in the future. This particular project, Co-op 789, one of the community leaders, Tia Taruk Myers here, came to us and let us know that they had learned that their owner was selling the building. And all of these folks are organizers, teachers, gardeners, coffee roasters, folks who regularly contribute to the community. In fact, one great example is Tia is the founder of the Alipato Project. It is one of the only law firms that sues domestic abusers in civil court on behalf of their victims. The space for folks to be able to teach, to learn, to share food, to share art is the core of our mission. We want to retain the people in our community who are transforming, strengthening, and holding up our community. We want to retain them through affordability. We want to retain them through control. And we want to retain them through involving them in governance of our work and our mission. And these people were a group of cooperators, and we knew this was the right place. So even while other organizations and institutions were taking our vision and our mission very lightly, we knew that critical mass made all the difference. So these resident owners and the 5 members of EBPREC undertook a $1 million capital campaign. And in our first efforts, we raised $285,000 for Co-op 789, as it has come to be affectionately known. In the process, Northern California Land Trust approached us and suggested that we partner on this first acquisition. So that's a critical part of coming out of the box with a very small capital base, folks new to the field, is that, excuse me, we really needed a relationship that would begin to build a financial identity for our organization. So Northern California Land Trust undertook the $700,000 loan from Heritage Bank. EBPREC raised $300,000 in cash, and we were able to attain $300,000. I think my math is about right. We were able to attain $300,000 through Measure K government funding, through co-writing with the Northern California Land Trust 100-page application. Now, I mentioned that because one of the key things that was critical as we were incubated by the Sustainable Economies Law Center, and in this case as well, the support from Northern California Land Trust, is that SELC, as we call the Sustainable Economies Law Center, or rather this SELC and NCLT, really went out on a limb and created an outcome. So there's a particular terminology. They decided to hold the risk for a Black and people of color organization, the risk that's attributed to the $700,000 loan, the risk that's attributed to, in SELC's case, co-writing grants and creating a stream of capital on behalf of EBPREC, so that we had enough runway to organize our community around the capital campaign, to meet folks and talk about and elaborate upon our vision so that we could get folks energized and fired up, and then to show proof of concept for our very first project. So we received technical support from the SELC, legal support, relationship support. We received capital support from the SELC and capital support from the Northern California Land Trust as well. Also in the beginning, we launched with our 5-member founders with a $36,000 budget that we raised from a soft fundraising campaign where we called supporters and asked one at a time, can you give us $1,000? Can you give us $5,000? And we paid ourselves half-time, $20 an hour to build and launch this organization and launch our very first project, Co-op 789, who now has an additional member because Tia and Crow have had a baby. And Tia never felt like she was secure enough or stable enough to bring a child into the world. And now we have a new member of the co-op. And guess what her name is? Her name is Noni. That feels amazing to me. I didn't ask for it. I sort of did, but I was joking. Our next project was Prince Street. Prince Street was donated to us by an amazingly wonderful woman named Carolyn North, who is now retired in Vermont with her children. She and her husband bought this house in about 1950 for, I think what she told us was about $35,000. This house is now appraised at about $1.3 million. And when it was time for Carolyn, who's a pivotal dancer and member of the arts and just transition community, when it was time for Carolyn to start thinking about retiring, her radical mind felt like it didn't make sense for her and her husband's life's work to go back onto the speculative market and be traded as a commodity. What she wanted instead was for all of that labor, all of that heart, all of the story, and all of the accrued value, both the naturally accrued value and the inflated accrued value of the speculative market. She wanted to find a way to fold that value back into the just transition movement in a real way. And through several pathways, including the Oakland, California Land Trust, Carolyn North donated Prince Street to the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. And we've dedicated this house to her vision, and it now houses Black working artists with a detached dance studio in order for them to launch a separate stream of revenue out of the studio. One member runs a dojo, another is a teaching artist, and another is a designing artist. The critical part about Prince Street was that at the time, even though we had attained Co-op 789, as we wanted to move our capital strategy to a higher level, most folks we talked to, so we made our second round of door knocking, where we're like, okay, we have a small proof of concept. I want to name some of these financial institutions, but they're escaping my brain right now. Please reach out if you want further guidance on places to begin. But we did our second round of door knocking. We went back to banks. We went back to foundations. We went back to capital investors. And what they really insisted, despite the first cycle telling us that a proof of concept would do, when we moved to the next level, what they insisted is that we needed a fairly weighty asset on our books. And this is around the time when we were negotiating this donation from Carolyn North. Completing that donation and getting the house officially on our books as an asset opened up a whole world for us. Especially because our next project was a project called Esther's Orbit Room, a commercial project for which you saw the promo member meeting video at the beginning of this conversation. And it's a commercial space that is one of the last historic Black spaces on West Oakland's historic 7th Street corridor. And we needed to raise $6 million for this project. All of the folks who said, let's keep talking, said the same thing once we had the Prince Street on our books. But what it did do is it broke the gates for our first money in for Esther's, which came from the Katali Foundation, founded by a brilliant thinker and finance member of the Just Transition community, Namarka Agbo, along with several other pivotal organizations that helped launch that fund. Katali Foundation was the first with money in, and we received a $1.7 million zero interest loan from the Katali Foundation. They were able to vet and move that investment through Impact Capital, which is a notoriously difficult finance organization to be vetted by, because we had that second investment, that second asset on our books, Prince Street. And so once Katali unlocked their capital, it unlocked the rest of the capital. Because what you have to understand is in the finance and real estate field, it's heavily relationship based. A lot of people call it trust based. And people are using the term trust based because they're trying to open a pathway to create new relationships with new folks entering the field like us, and hopefully you all in the future. But when they use the term trust based, it's referring back to the real structure of how people move large pots of capital in the real estate market and in the finance market. And it is about building relationships. So, despite having the capital support from Northern California Land Trust for Co-op 789, and then having the $1 million, $1.3 million asset from the donation from Carolyn North, and even having critical community mass at this point for Esther's Orbit Room, it still needed another peer foundation to unlock this kind of permission for other large foundations to move their capital to a project such as ours. We are missing our fourth project, which is California Avenue, and you can check this out on our website at www.ebprec.org. We are in contract also to buy the building next door to Esther's Orbit Room called The Barn. And we are also now in contract for a 10-unit, highly neglected building in East Oakland called Pippin Street. So we're super excited about the way that we've been able to stack one kind of support on top of another kind of support to get to the point where now we are the organization de-risking outcomes for other individuals who can't break through the barrier of relationship, capital, and stable organizational process. So just to revisit how typical capital would work for something like a purchase. So there's a bank that brings capital to the market and they sell it. The thing that they're doing, that the sell price is what is called the interest rate. So for every dollar you borrow, you pay back that dollar plus a certain percent of the dollar. So if the interest rate is 10%, for every dollar you borrow, you pay back the dollar plus 10%. So I can't stop with my brain right now and do the math, but multiply $1 million times 0.10. And you'll understand that when the bank sells you money, or rather sells the landlord money, that interest rate and the cost of maintaining the property is passed on to the tenants. And the landlord keeps the profit in his pocket and shares some of that profit with the bank. Do you see how these arrows don't actually ever filter back into the tenant body or the people body? Unless the people are the owner of the bank, unless the people are the owner of the capital. So when you reimagine that from the people and a mission-aligned bank that is willing to sell us money at a non-extractive rate. So non-extractive means a rate at which it doesn't cause the people living in the property to be rent burdened, to have to live in poverty or neglect, right? And so those interest rates that are non-extractive have to be at 4% and below, particularly when you're borrowing large pots of money. And 4 is really a very tight threshold for creating affordability. As I mentioned, we borrow capital from our community, the people and mission-aligned banks, at anywhere between 0% and 2%. When we refinance our projects about 5 or 10 years down the line, we do expect that there have to be some more spaciousness around the interest rate at maybe 3%, 4% at worst. But that means 10 years we've been able to make the properties cash flow. We stabilized our 10-year plan. And so that interest rate is not so extractive as it is when you're coming out of the gate. And so the people, or you or me, are also often the resident owners or the neighbors, right? And not only do we contribute low cost money to our projects, we contribute energy. I probably should have loaded up some of our community cleaning pictures, but we do most of the work ourselves, or we find Black people of color, underserved members of our community to do our professional work. And as that equity is returned to our folks, it continues to circulate within our community. We don't talk about it much anymore, but in the 90s, we surfaced how the problem with poverty works in urban areas and underserved communities. The dollars that come into our communities often circulate one time or less. It comes from the employer or the business, and you spend it at a corporate location like a grocery store, Safeway, and it immediately leaves the community to go into the international coffers of the owner class of Safeway or otherwise. Healthy communities, their dollars need to circulate 11 times to create an equal health to the most well-resourced communities. So when you or me give money to EB-PREC, that's one circulation. And then we circulate it into the property. That's another circulation. We circulate it into the people of color who are our professionals and our technicians. That's another circulation. We circulate it back into our resident owners' pockets through equity and back into the folks who have invested in us. Besides for paying our staff, right? Giving honorariums. So the real power of transforming and using your own closed system of money is you increase the number of times you circulate. I don't think we often realize that $1 can support 5 people if we're thinking about where it goes after it leaves our hands. So, as I mentioned, we are a multi-stakeholder cooperative in the way that we undertake these relationships between passing resources between one another, passing community control between one another. And our 4 categories of owners are staff owners, community owners, investor owners, and resident owners. And we work kind of a stellar model or a nuclear, a cellular model. And they, as you see here from the image, Staff Collective is really the center. We've been ceded most of our power by the board, and we're called staff trustees. And we reach out and support our co-ops, Co-op 789. We support our community owners. We advise you on projects. We help you launch projects. Oh, you become a project group. So then we help guide that project group to where it wants to go. We reach out and we support the co-op at Esther's. Esther's Orbit Room has smaller businesses inside of it. So Esther's Orbit Room supports the smaller businesses. So you create an ever-extending body of support and supported that circulate resources, time, energy back and forth between itself instead of it dissipating immediately into corporate structures, into government structures. We want to rebuild our local municipality, but you have to start by rebuilding yourselves first. Our staff owners, as I mentioned, are the stewards of the EB-PREC vision. This is our current staff collective. This is our retreat from last year. We love the mirror selfies. Our community owners are our steering and governance arm. And there's a very low threshold to become a community owner, $10 a week, a month, or a year. It's really meant to have a skin in the game, but not let capital be the barrier. If you don't have the $10 to join, we will pay it for you. Community ownership is the most critical to the transformation of our futures together. Our investor owners are the folks who buy $1 or $100,000 shares and allow us to hold it for 5 years with a projected 1.5% return. These are the folks who are putting money in a pot for us to serve our community, to serve our resident owners, and to serve the scaling of a vision that really could change our nation. For folks who want to invest but don't have the capital, we also have a subsidized investment fund for Black, Indigenous people of color. We do prioritize artists, but generally our low and mid income members, it's self reported to join and invest in EB-PREC. It's your investment. We give you the investment, and when it's time to return, when you're ready to pull it out, you can pull out your investment. Please get in touch for investment subsidies. You can email princess@ebprec.org. Our resident owners are the folks who are living, working, and co-governing in our land and housing configurations. We create a resident agreement and a covenant, and all of the finances are transparent, and we maintain and plan for the life of these homes and commercial spaces together. The cool thing that I mentioned in the beginning is the residents simulate the benefits of home ownership. Permanence, because we're anti-displacement. Permanent affordability, because we do not pass on the administrative and extractive costs of the projects to our residents. And also a surplus account, that anything that the residents pay over the cost of the project itself is held into an account and either refunded at the end of the year or put into a maintenance account. And over time, as we collectively pay down the cost of the project together, your rent doesn't remain the same, and nor does it increase. It reduces to the cost of maintenance, taxes, and improvements. That is what homeownership is supposed to be. That is the function of why homeownership supports the U.S. economy, because it doesn't continue to, as on the speculative market, inflate to the point where you have an 85-year-old grandmother paying a $3,000 rent. What you're supposed to have is an 85-year-old grandmother paying an $800 rent because she paid in through her capital, her labor, and her sweat equity for the prior 30 years. We have it reversed and confused in the United States commodity market right now. So in order to facilitate the access to searching and creating projects together, even if they're not acquisition projects, we have an owner group that wants to make interventions on policy in Oakland. We have an owner group that wants to start an arts collective. So we're really helping you form cooperative organizations and cooperative governance practices, and helping you find the resources to launch that vision. Primarily with us, it's land and housing, but there are also many other ways that folks seek to impact their community. Our owner groups are our favorite organizing pathway to sharing information and empowering people to lead. And they fit in because every project has to have a body of owners to govern it, right? So this is decentralized power. Centralized power means all the decisions are made in one office by one small group of people, selected by another small group of people. Decentralized power is that there is a collective mission that everyone learns, agrees to, and then reproduces to the best of their ability in their small nodes. And you keep consistency through transparency, through note-taking, through reporting, and through connecting on a regular basis with the group, with your community. We also have one other mechanism that ensures that we can stay on mission long term. One of the key things that happens with transformative organizations is something that you can hear described as mission drift, where we begin with a Black executive director and people of color lead. We begin with 5 elected directors. And slowly, as many things do in the United States, it always drifts towards whiteness. It always drifts towards mainstream practices. It always drifts towards the convention. Oh, well, there's not anything less than 7% money on the market. So what can we do? Actually, you can do a lot. And you can reject certain market conventions. You can reject certain patternings around how you hire, who you elect as your director, so that you keep a vision alignment with your technical work. And so with our board, we do that by doing these 2 things. We have 5 elected directors. One is governance, one is finance, one is staff that comes from our staff body. One is resident that comes from our resident owner body, and one is community that comes from our community owner body. And then we have 3 reserved seats, one for our People of Color Housing Justice Director, one for our Indigenous Director, and one for our Black East Bay Director. And organizations have the power of appointment. Potion has the power of appointment for our Housing Justice. Segorite Land Trust, our first Ohlone Land Trust ever, that has had a lot of land rematriated to them, appoint our Indigenous Director. And East Oakland Collective, which is doing really critical work in the Deep East, appoints our Black East Bay Director. So we've come to the end of my presentation, but definitely not the end of all of the potential information I could share with you. But I hope that was clarified and informative, and looking forward to more of your questions. And I'm going to hand it back to Ephraim to guide us through the conversation. Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it.
I have no words. This was an incredible opportunity to hear from you. This is, I'm just, I mean, roughly, I was literally writing notes and just going wild listening to all of the insight that you have, because this is one of the more unique and insightful models that I've honestly ever heard of. And it really speaks to the way all of our imaginations have been pruned, and because of the systems that we occupy. And so it's almost like that, kind of bringing your head out of the dirt hole that we've been stuck in, and just considering that there's possibility for just something different that doesn't look like what we've grown so used to. So thank you. Just thank you so much for your insight. It has honestly been a privilege. We are going to transition into a Q&A segment of our session. And so I do want to open up that floor to questions for Noni. You can please utilize the chat feature. Please type your inquiries into the chat. We will begin to answer those questions. Your active participation is incredibly crucial in making this discussion not only informative, but also deeply engaging. So thank you again, Noni, for being with us. And let's see if there are any questions. And I actually have a bunch of my own. So I'm happy to ask these questions as we wait for audience members to begin thinking about the questions they want to ask. And really the first thing that I ended up writing notes about, and I have my notes over here to the side, was the quote that came directly from the video. It said, "Oaklanders know what Oaklanders need." And, this is an incredibly powerful testament to the way the community needs are centered from the mouth of the community itself. It's incredibly important that it's the community speaking for itself. So can you walk us through whatever process you might have used to learn the community's needs? Is the process internal once people have joined the co-op, especially after an orientation? How do you design a collective continuing to assess the needs of community and adapting?
I think that's a great point of tension inside of our work. When we first started, we held at least a year of advisory council where we were really pulling in the input and the vision of a wide range of community, and the attendance changed each month. And we designed a lot of activities and conversations to really extract kind of our blue sky for what ended up becoming EB-Prac could do. Once we got inside of the bubble of work, like daily work, details, technical decisions, these sort of cloistered conversations with finance folks, and line by line reviews of our bylaws, and vetting 10 to 15 projects for every one possible project, it became really challenging to continue to assess and reassess. And what we had to do was, for our general structure, which I'm so grateful for some of us in the collective reminding us at every turn that our obligation was to create open, concentrically growing circles at every stage. So messy in the beginning, so flawed in the beginning, but we kept the door open. We let people see our flaws and failures. And as we found a project, we created this structure. This community owner structure was critical to it. So every month we had a community owner meeting, and we would go into grave detail on the wins, the failures, the questions, and we would crowdsource solutions from our community owner body. And they'd say, well, have you talked to this person? Have you thought about this? Half of it we had, half of it we hadn't. And we would take it away and we would fold it into our process. In addition, because we wanted to continue to verbalize and articulate the motto and what we were doing, every other week we did an orientation, an open door orientation, where we reviewed the same vision again and again, and we would remark upon it ourselves, rethink as questions would come in from people. Some nights we'd have one person at the orientation, and some nights we'd have 25 people at the orientation. And for a solid 2 years, every other week, we had an open door orientation. So we were meeting with our community minimum 3 times a month. Often it was more than that. As well as the many of the open design meetings we continue to hold. I'd say up until we closed escrow on the first property. And then we launched resident education platform, where for the acquisition itself, we're doing learning and planning with the residents themselves. So crowdsourcing from them who we should be working with, what we should be prioritizing, what doesn't make sense, what's not manageable. So at every stage, as messy as it was, whoever were the most concerned with the set of decisions we were making, we had a regular and transparent, meaning not top down, not the executive director giving a report, everyone sitting still with their hands closed and then signing off, but rather a very lateral conversation that, although sometimes we had to take our facilitator's privilege and manage it, it was still a transformative space, even when you sometimes got a little disruption in there. So that was one of the main ways that we shared. We recorded a lot. You'll see there's a lot of videos out there on EBPrec. So even though they were grainy and kind of like real amateur, we decided to prioritize getting the information out there as opposed to prioritizing production, which we've gotten a little better over time with production. But what we never had a shortage of were people excited and activated by the transparency and our willingness to ask and use the answers to many of the questions. As you probably know, in this nonprofit field, you get a lot of performative information collecting, where people show up with their butcher paper, but you're clear they already know what they're going to do, or they're checking a box for a grant or a capital or something that they say is part of their structure or their structure mission. No shade to nonprofit processes. Yeah, little shade to nonprofit processes.
A little shade. A little shade is okay.
But that is one of the ways that we continue to, as you put it, assess and reassess. Although in some areas there was a boundary there, in other areas we were like, F the boundaries. We gotta get this word out. So.
Incredible. Noni, do people struggle acclimating to the level of integrity that you're describing here?
Yeah, they think it's a crock of poop. They're like, there's no way. There's no way. I've never seen anything like it. There's no way. And after a while, you can't deny it.
Right.
I have some real, we have some real Pollyannas inside of EBPrec. If y'all don't know what Pollyannas are, you should probably watch the movie. There's a white version and a black version. The black version has Keisha Knight Pullum in it. So, yeah, so you can have either of them. And with real deep hearts, that most of us are here because we just can't stand for it. Like, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and now I'm running the project development, relationship development, and resource building for EBPrec. Our director of finance is a landscape designer who's now our real estate director and our finance director. Our operations director was a construction manager's assistant. This is a group of people who, in some ways, had no business moving into the real estate and finance field, but they couldn't stand for it anymore and had a little extra resource to work for free. We practically worked for free for about 1.5 years, 2 years. So we recognize that our privilege allowed us to start this up so powerfully, and that not everyone has that flexibility to work 40 hours a week for 20 hours of pay for $20 an hour. So I think I lost the line of what your question was because I got.
I mean, every single thing you have to say is incredible. So don't even fret. But I was just asking about the ways people, as they're moving through these systems and then
Yeah. So
arriving into
you have
this.
to see it. You have to be in it. And so this is why our mission pillars are so critical, because you can make a lot of assumptions about what a real estate and finance cooperative is doing. But when someone starts every conversation with, first of all, we have to discuss the ethics that drive the work we do. And our key ethic is that if we continue to commit violence upon one another, we're doing the work of the state. And so we have to take a radical opposition to interpersonal and communal violence inside and out in order to create durable organizations that can compete with the violence of the speculative market. It's a must. Anti-Blackness, anti-gender, anti-community. It's we can't excuse it inside or outside of our communities anymore. We can't excuse violence as a means of self-defense. We can't excuse violence as a means of external defense. Like, we live in a violent society and they're going to come with the guns and the knives, except pulling out a gun and a knife doesn't do anything but produce bigger guns and bigger knives.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times I've seen, and this is a personal statement, this is not an E.B. Precht statement, that within our communities where we're trying to create justice for ourselves, we're trying to create gender justice, we're trying to create racial justice, we often will excuse using violence against one another as a means of personal defense. You intervening on my self-identity and my safety in a way that I don't agree with is not a license for me to return that violence to you. It's an opportunity to mobilize a nonviolent community and to model what I would have hoped to receive from you in the instance we find ourselves. That's the radical work we're doing. And people don't really know how to absorb it until they see it in action. All right. And it doesn't mean that we aren't violent. It doesn't mean that I haven't yelled in a meeting, but it does mean then we have 4 follow-up meetings to talk about how yelling affected the person, how yelling was an expression of some unmet need of mine, and then how we structure from future forward to hold the unmet need that caused me to yell and hold the need to not be yelled at in a meeting, right? So this is not there's no violence in E.B. Precht. There is no tolerance of pretending that violence didn't happen when it comes about, no matter who it comes from. So you see it in action after a while.
You're really illustrating a lot of the nuance of abolitionism, like these ideas. Of course, when we think of abolition, people immediately think of the prison state. And there are so many elements of like an abolitionist mindset in interpersonal relationships, taking back some of the revenge, maybe that's almost owed, and kind of what you're describing. And that was really an incredible way to illustrate it, because I think I've always had a difficult time communicating or illustrating it. And you just did an incredible job of doing that. Thank you so much. I have a few other questions here. A very quick question from the LGBTQ Senior Housing Incorporation. They ask, did you say that there is a permanent real estate collective in Massachusetts?
Willow, Massachusetts. Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So LGBTQ Senior Housing Inc., you got it. there in Willow. Um, from Katie, we have a question. What advice would you have for either community leaders, communities themselves, developers that might be interested in creating a model like EBPrex?
Cooperatives are formed. The key to cooperatives are the people. And cooperatives are formed according to a collective affinity for whatever that is. Cat petting cooperative, housing cooperative, like that's the whole point. A common vision that you connect together to create collective action and collective vision and collective outcomes around. So, advice to a developer, and I'm taking that in the most proper sense of that you have experience and background bringing capital and construction together to build or bring houses to the market. So, I'm referring to you as a professional and a bureaucrat. Developers that want to create a model like EBPrec need to create an enabling environment for the community leaders who really who have the vision to be the vehicle for it, to gather together and to begin to build a collective vision with you, baked into the DNA. If community members are an afterthought, you've already reproduced the classic top-down expert model that plugs in inert Black and brown bodies as an afterthought. So that's the key beginning step, as I mentioned, with Sustainable Economies Law Center. Yes, they were writing white papers. Yes, they were getting followers and supporters juicy for the eventuality of something like this. Even work to change a law that would let us crowd finance with a lot of simplicity that's not readily available in the federal financing laws. Which, by the way, we are now federally approved, but we needed a couple of years to scale up to be able to really write that application ourselves, which, by the way, we did not hire a consultant. We did it ourselves to hold the knowledge in our staff body and be able to transfer it to our community.
Sure.
But the steps for creating the reality of humans doing this every day, those folks need to be brought together with some support to envision where they want to take it. And I want to fold that into one of your other questions from Kenneth, from Katie. Oh, that's also Katie. Okay, great, Katie. Yeah. But it's from Kenneth. Okay, whatever. Where it says some stakeholders may have the financial capacity to participate, or maybe the time, or maybe the privilege, or maybe the passion, but not the mental, emotional capacity. Can you screen for mental stability, particularly with the multi-stakeholder model? So here's the thing. You have a core body of people who are the stewards of the core vision. And trust me, as we went through I can't even see your face. If somebody, thank you, take that. When we spent that year or more in advisory council, there were hundreds of people who came through advisory council because it was open door. And maybe 15-20% of them fall into this descriptive category that Kenneth surfaces here. And so one of the keys was that we didn't start out as sort of like, we didn't have any contract with one another. We just started out as a group of people who thought this was a great idea and wanted to share what we thought about it. And then some of us returned over and over again. And even some of the people who didn't necessarily have a stable capacity returned over and over again. And as we started to build out things like how to make collective decisions, how we vote, so we use a consent-based model, it has an objection threshold. We really started to address the challenges of saying no when it was time to say no. To say like, Jordan, we appreciate your vision, but we have decided as a collective, we voted that, and this is at the point when you start to gel into a collective, right? And you make decisions about who you want to undertake this life's work with. This is at least a 10-year project. This is at least a 10-year project. We're at year 5, and that's year 5 from public launch. There were 3 years before public launch of work, right? So technically we're at year 8. And we find that we are about to scale up to our next level, but this is really a 5 to 10 year project, right? So though the voting, the clarity and the authenticity is critical to filtering through the folks who can show up nonviolently, who can show up in a stable manner. But it does take time, and it does take generosity to say, okay, you're a little too unstable for us to make these hard money decisions together, but maybe you should be in charge of the food. So we also had this other method where we recognize that Noni, as the executive director, may not be able to do a profit and loss statement, but she is particularly good at fill in the blank. So you reconfigure and reorganize tasks where a person is strongest. And I used to make a joke when we first launched that between the 5 of us, we were one powerhouse of an executive, because we all had a fragment of what a whole leader needed. And that is a statement for life. And that is a statement for our community. Yeah.
Beautiful. You've really provided a lot of insight today. There is one last question, which we only really have about a minute to answer, that I wanted to get to. But the question is from Open House Housing, and they're asking, does EB-PREC feel the time pressure of how quickly the speculative real estate market can act when it comes to seizing properties, and how do you counter that? And I know it's a very short time that you have to answer, but apologies.
Yeah, actually, that was one of our early considerations for our strategy. So when we came out of the box, we did a lot of relationship building, again, not just with banks and foundations, and also not just with our rent burdened and unstable community members, but also with the middle range of folks who have relationships, who know things are coming on the market, who have ideas around how to get into a certain property. So in the beginning, we really depended on folks coming to us in advance of the market with opportunities. In the case of Esther's, we tried to pick underrated properties that people think are not redeemable. So the Esther's Orbit Room had been on the market on and off for 10 or 15 years, and many people had vetted it for purchase and wrote it off. But it was because it didn't have the right formula for how to activate Esther's Orbit Room, right? And so now, after we've done 4 projects and really our model's very recognized, and our financial fitness, that's a really biased term, but our financial fitness is recognized, we have been able to create a what we call a seed fund for us to be able to move quickly 5 years later. And because of that, we were able to close on we're closing on 2 properties in the next 60 days, a $740,000 property and a $2.1 million property. We're going to close in 60 days on 2 properties, but that's after this 5 years of slowly getting one discarded property, another property pre-market, another property that didn't sell, but we created a really powerful formula to activate it. So you start with the unwanted, as you often need to do, and then you move yourself to a place, once your finances are stable, that you create a slight slush. But now that we're spending down, we're going to need to spend the next year or two raising another 5 to 10 million to be able to do this cycle again. But we believe it's going to scale up, and there'll be larger tranches of capital that follow as we show more and more proof of concept.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Noni. Anyone who's interested in learning more, please go to their website, ebprec.org. You can reach out to Noni and the community at large. I think the work that is happening here is just remarkable. It's transformative. It's radical. And I don't want people to miss the spiritual part. There is an internal process. That's something that is going to be very difficult to, here's the way to grow, to learn yourself and unpack all of the systems. But there is that spiritual work that has to happen that is core and central to this. And I'm so grateful, Noni, for your time. All right, everyone, as we draw this enlightening session of the LGBTQ plus Elder Services Housing Symposium to a close, I want to yet again extend my deepest gratitude to our remarkable speaker, Noni Session. Noni, your insights, your experience, your wisdom, have cast a bright light on our symposium, and we are profoundly honored to have had you as our speaker for this session focused on thriving in community home ownership as aging care. I'd also like to express heartfelt appreciation to the teams at InterpreNet who provided invaluable captioning services and Interpret That, who ensured that our event was accessible through American Sign Language interpretation. Your unwavering dedication to accessibility has made it possible for a broader audience to engage in these crucial discussions. Furthermore, a special thank you goes out to our esteemed partner organization, SAGE, for their consistent support and collaboration throughout the symposium. Together, we are affecting meaningful change in the lives of LGBTQ plus elders. We must also acknowledge the generous contribution of the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation, whose support made this symposium possible. Their commitment to initiatives benefiting our community is immeasurable, and we are deeply appreciative of their support. Of course, finally, a heartfelt shout out to Tuttle Co., the production company working tirelessly behind the scenes, making all of the magic happen. Your dedication and expertise have ensured that this symposium runs smoothly. Remember, your registration for this symposium grants you access to the last session, I can't believe it's the last next week, of the LGBTQ plus Elder Services Housing Symposium, taking place every Tuesday in September at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have an outstanding lineup of speakers and topics that promise to deepen our understanding of the housing challenges and opportunities faced by LGBTQ plus elders. So please mark your calendars, share the news, join us next week for our last engaging session. With the support of our partners like SAGE, organizations like InterpreNet and Interpret That, and the invaluable contributions of Tuttle Co., we can continue to construct a more inclusive and affirming future for LGBTQ plus elders. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you soon.